Hello YouTube, this is a quick video to discuss the viability of flying DCS World in virtual reality. Now I've always steered clear from DCS World simply because it tends to model a lot of modern aircraft, and these aircraft have many subsystems, sometimes hundreds of buttons, and I thought it'd be impossible to control such complex aircraft from within VR, because in VR you can't see the keyboard. Be pretty hard to get hold of the mouse, so as a result I stayed away, because once I got hold of VR and did my first flight experiences in X-Plane and IL-2, I couldn't go back to flying on a flat 2D screen, because you lose that sensation of flights when you're flying on a 2D screen, and because of that I kind of stayed away from DCS, because I just didn't think you could fly it in VR. It was in my mind too complicated, but you can do it. There's just a few settings that you need to look at. The first setting, which we'll go over to the VR menu here, is you want to look at your pixel density. Now I set pixel density at 1.5, and because this simulation is CPU bound, it makes no difference to performance, but it makes a huge difference to the clarity. Now with a Vive Pro, with that at 1.5, I can see pretty much everything and read everything without the need to have any artificial zooms or anything, and that just makes a really big difference when you're flying. So that's certainly the first thing I do. Onto the controls, the other thing I would do is map all of your mouse controls to various HOTAS bits on your throttle and joystick. Unfortunately they're hidden under a submenu called UI layer, which you can see top right, but it's vitally important that you map certain I guess functionality onto your HOTAS. Obviously you want your mouse commands mapped, things like left, right mouse button, mouse wheel up and down, but you also want to map other important things like centering the view, because by default centering the view is done from the keyboard, numeric keypad, but of course you can't see the keyboard when you got your headset on, and I found that very frustrating. But if you go to this UI layer, then you can find the mapping here for that, and it is worth mapping that. The other things I tend to map are the escape key, and I do have the zoom mapped, but with the Vive Pro I very rarely need to have that done. So yeah, vitally important to get this mapping done, because without it you can't really control your aircraft from VR. So definitely worth doing. Now the reason for this interest in trying to find out if I could fly DCS or VR is they've recently released a number of superb aircraft, ones I've always been interested in, and that's the F-18 Hornet and the F-14 Tomcat, and when you combine those aircraft for carrier operations, I thought I'm going to find out if I can fly DCS in VR, because you better do that before spending like $80 on all of those aircraft, because it'd be a bit of a waste of money otherwise. And here we're going into a very quick mission I've built. It's quite a simple sort of start on a runway, fly off, and away we go. Now I'm controlling everything here from my throttle, the various buttons on there which I've got on there to mimic the mouse, so I'm not using a mouse here at all. And it's just really straightforward to do once you've set it up, of course. This will put us into the cockpit. So one of the first things you tend to do once you get in the cockpit is you'll want to center your view, which I've just done there. And again, I've mapped that onto one of my throttle buttons. Don't rely on the standard keyboard mapping, because you'll never find it with your headset on. Now flying in VR has many advantages over a flat screen. The first one is you're actually in the aircraft. You feel like you're actually sat in the aircraft. It has a certain physicality to it that you simply don't get on a 2D screen. and it's like very easy to look around. It's as simple as just moving one's head. Whereas when you're playing on a monitor, unless you've got track IR, you're kind of playing with hat buttons and things just to look around. And here I can click buttons very easily, as you see there. Just look and press a HOTAS button. Very, very simple. And that's all without a mouse or anything else. Very simple to control. There are some downsides, like I can't reach all those buttons down the left and the right, simply because I can't look that far, at least not with my current seat. So there are some downsides, but at the end of the day, everything in the A10s you can control from your HOTAS, you control from the two MFDs and the up-front display as well. You very rarely need to touch other panels except for perhaps an initial startup, so it's well worth doing. Now, the other thing I should probably mention is this recording, it cuts off the display because VR has a huge field of view, especially in the vertical axis. So whilst you might find things hard to read here, in reality I can read everything in VR without zoom. Everything in the HUD is super clear. I can read all the dials very easily. The only thing I really have problems with are some of the labels and some of the smaller buttons, but I kind of know what they are anyway, and I've always got the zoom function if I need it. But in VR there is that physicality. You look around and all you see is solid aircraft all around you. You just don't get that on a screen. And the other thing is, in VR everything is 1:1 scale. You're seeing it in its actual size, and this A10 Warthog looks freaking huge in VR, whereas on a screen it's all scaled down to fit your screen. So yeah, many advantages of VR. The fact that you're seeing things at the size they really are, and you're seeing them, it's like you're really there, you're really sat in there. So here we are, we're on the roll for a takeoff, and again I easily read the HUD and everything else. It's that clear, especially with the 1.5 super sampling. Yeah, really easy to fly and so damn immersive. So what we're going to do now, we'll stick the old landing gear up, and of course in VR I can actually look around and watch the wheels come up, which will be a little bit harder to do if you're flying on a TV screen. In fact, one of the weird things I found with VR is if you target and lock up something on one of your MFDs, in VR you can see that it's 2D on the MFD like it would be in real life, because that represents a monitor. Yet if you look at the same target out the window, it looks like a real 3D object, and it kind of provides that separation between the aircraft and its surrounding environment, something you don't get on a monitor. Because on a monitor everything's just one big rendered picture, and that's because you have this depth of view. You have real 3D depth to this, and it's so simple to look around. It's as natural as just turning your head. Of course the downside is that in dogfights you really have to kind of scramble out your seat to look behind you properly, but that's just what a real pilot has to do. In terms of detail, I've got nearly everything maxed out there, and it looks absolutely superb, and it's running very fluidly, especially given that I'm recording on the same machine and I'm sending data to TACView as well. It's just liquid smooth. Now I'm running a relatively old i7. It's a 6700K, running 16 gigs of RAM and a 1080 Ti. So apart from the graphics card, it's a relatively old system, but it has no problems with DCS. Although I have heard that DCS performance does suffer and there's a lot of enemy AI, but I've yet to experience those issues. So yeah, we're only going to do a very quick flight around and then perform a landing, just to show that it is easily possible. And here you can see me cycling through the MFDs, and here I'm using the standard HOTAS commands that are built into the Warthog, and so I'm not even clicking on the virtual buttons. I'm relying on the built-in HOTAS functionality, and there is so much you can do with your HOTAS. Like here I'm moving the map in and out. You can change waypoints by making the HUD SOI and moving your I think it's called the DMS, yeah, the DMS switch up and down. Or you could alternatively use the crosshair, the blue crosshair you see there, as a to actually click the relevant buttons. But whoever designed the A10, they've done such a good job with the HOTAS control that you can do most things without taking your hands off the throttle and stick, which is again what it's designed for. And VR, the scenery, it's just awesome, and because I say you're seeing it one to one, those mountains look big and they look very far away, and it's not an effect you get on a 2D screen. It just looks like part of the rendered picture. So yeah, it's really good. Of course, the downsides to VR for some people get motion sickness, although I don't get it, and I know from talking to people that do get it that flight sims tend to be okay mostly. I don't know why, but your mileage may vary. The other downside, of course, is because you have real depth perception. When you look out the cockpit window and look at the scenery below you, you can see how far below you it is. So if you've got an issue with heights, then flight simming in VR might not be for you, because it'll either cure your vertigo or you just wouldn't fly. So yeah, there are some minor disadvantages, but in every other respect it's far better than flying on a screen, simply because with a screen you're watching a projected image, a shrunken image of your cockpit, which tends to remain fairly static because it's hard to look around without moving a coolie hat. That's unless you've got track IR. Whereas with VR, it's all so natural. Everything, as I said, it's one-to-one scale. You get a feel for the physicality of the aircraft, the cramped conditions in the cockpit, and just how large it is. I can remember on my first air-to-air mission, I was looking out at the pylons, and I had a Sidewinder missile. Now, as we all know, Sidewinders are, well, they're supposed to be relatively small, aren't they? And you don't really think anything of them. But when you view it in VR, you're seeing that Sidewinder as it is in real life. And I looked at it and thought, wow, that looks like a two-man lift. it doesn't look small. And that's simply because VR brings this solidity to things and scale, which you simply just don't get. Anyway, here I'm lining up the plane for a landing on the runway, and again I have no issues with clarity, though as I mentioned I am using a Vive Pro, which has a higher pixel density than some of the other VR headsets, and that could make a difference. But yeah, easily see the runway from here, easily read the HUD. In short, it's very simple to fly the plane in this configuration without using any artificial zooms or anything else for that matter. So yeah, so in many respects over the last few days my testing's borne out the fact that yes, you can fly DCS from VR and be effective in VR, and because of that I'm very likely to go ahead and purchase either the F18 or the F14 and have some carrier fun. But as I say, it is vitally important that you get those keyboard mapping sorted out, because when I first started this I was super frustrated. The first issue was, how do I send to my cockpit? I looked all around the internet and said, oh, it's mapped to your 5 key on a numeric keypad. And then I thought, okay, I can't see my keypad and I got the VR headset on. So my first few attempts of flying I was randomly reaching out trying to find the 5 key and not doing so well. And the reason for that is a lot of that functionality, as I mentioned earlier, is hidden very well under the UI layers submenu under controls. So you must go to that submenu to find the relevant mappings, because that's where they all hang out. And the other issue I had was you can fly this using the Vive controllers, and again I had them on and they didn't seem to work at all until I suddenly realised that to use them you need to press the side buttons as well as the trigger, which a little bit of a handful. And the other issue I found is that one would have to take their hand off the joystick, find the Vive wand, pick it up and then use it, and it's just too awkward and bulky. And of course, when you weren't using the Vive ones, you end up with two disembodied hands floating within your cockpit, which kind of put me off a bit. So I decided I wouldn't use the Vive ones. I thought about using the mouse, but that didn't pan out. I'd actually have to reach out for that. And in the end, I settled for using the center view of the headset. Now, the waves in VR are superb, but sometimes they distract me when I'm landing. I should really be looking at the runway rather than the waves, but hey ho, graphics are just that good. But like I say, because you have you can see depth of vision in VR, I don't have to look at the altimeter to see how high I'm at. So I can just look out the window and immediately gauge how high I'm at. And that's something that's very, very difficult to do on a flat screen. And it's the same with flying straight and level. Trimming an aircraft in VR is very simple, because you can almost feel by the seat of your pants whether the aircraft's going up or down slightly. Whereas on a screen, you sometimes have to look at your dials to figure that out. So it's quite different. So we are coming in for landing. We're aiming for the spot where all the other tyres are screeched on the runway, the sort of dark area. I'm on AOA, so this should be a good landing. Here we go. Touchdown, and we push the nose down and then get the old wheel brakes on. And of course I like to engage nose wheel steering as well, once to slow down a bit, just to make sure I have some authority over the front wheel steering. Put some more speed brake on. Notice how easy it is to look around. It's as natural as just turning your head. Yeah, you just can't get that with a flat screen. So yeah, to summarise, I think DCS aircraft can be flown in VR very easily, in fact, but you've got to put some time in to get the mapping sorted out so they're on your throttle or joystick, especially things like center view and so forth. Vitally important that you get those on. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope if you've been put off from flying DCS, I hope this gives you the impetus to give it a go yourself. Set up your controls and have a go, because it seriously is a much better experience in VR than it is on a flat screen. Anyway, that's it, and thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.